Uncovering the Truth Behind the Legend of Aw Abadir, Umar ar-Rida, by Harari Freethinkers. Introduction. Umar ar-Rida, colloquially known as Aw Abadir, is believed by the Harari people to be the founding father of Harar. The city of Harar is sometimes called Bändär Abadir, which means the city of Saint Abadir. The legend of Aw Abadir tells the tale of a hero. As a testament of his high regard, his name is a popular mention during religious and wedding songs. Abadir around the world. Ancient Carthaginian, Phoenician, mythology. The word Abadir can be traced to the ancient Carthaginian people, modern-day Tunisians. The word is composed of two Carthaginian terms and means magnificent father, or mighty father. Abadir is a title that the Carthaginians gave to gods of the first order. Abadir was also the name given to cone-formed stones. The stones were believed to have come from outer space and were objects of superstition and venerated by the Carthaginians. These stones were the oldest symbols of the Carthaginian deities. Christianity. Saint Abadir is also the name of a Coptic, Christian, saint. According to the Christian legend, Saint Abadir and his sister Saint Abadir fled from Antioch to Alexandria, where they were arrested and brought to Upper Egypt. Somali. The name Abadir is also related to the Dur clan of the Somali. The Dur is traditionally thought of as the oldest Somali group. They are believed to have played a key role in the Islamization of Somalia and East Africa in general through the historical Somali port town of Zila. Harari. From the above examples throughout the world, historically, the word Abadir has been associated with highly revered religious deities and figures. In the Harari language, the term al precedes the name Abadir as a signifier of his sainthood. Al also means father in the Harari language. Coincidentally, or maybe not so, as mentioned previously, Abadir means magnificent or mighty father. Therefore, one could translate Aw Abadir as literally meaning father mighty father. The Legend of Aw Abadir. In an undated document, the Fath Madinat Harar, the legend of Aw Abadir is told. Aw Abadir Umar ar-Rida is said to have arrived in the Harari area from the Hijaz in the year 1216 AD/405 H. There he met with the local Harala, Gaturi and Argoba people. It is believed that the local people had already embraced Islam upon Abadir's arrival. Aw Abadir is credited with strengthening the religious institutional framework of the community by reorganizing the society. According to the legend, Aw Abadir Umar ar-Rida defeats the invading Italians, Turks and Portuguese. The Fath Madinat Harar also mentions lions riding dragons, and describes what could be trains or tanks. Allegedly, there are oral traditions that state Aw Abadir entered Harar because he was sought by the Emir of Harar. The Emir Haboba, needed help with resolving warring tribes. Aw Abadir's approach was to unify the tribes under one faith. Some people peacefully cooperated, but others did not. Aw Abadir fought those who did not follow his instruction with a sword or a wooden club. The conclusion is that Aw Abadir was victorious and united the local Muslims. He then traveled to Somalia to fight with the people there to unite them. He also encouraged people to intermarry with those from other cities. Emir Haboba was so impressed by Aw Abadir's accomplishments that he was offered to rule over Harar. Al-Abdir then became the Emir of Harar. Issues with the legend of Aw Abadir. Researcher Dr. Ewald Wagner has explained the many issues with the Fath Madinat Harar. He further explains how while the chronicle discusses events from the 13th century, the written work was likely made in the 19th or even the 20th century. Below is further elaboration on these issues as well as additional ones. Incorrect date. The Fath Madinat Harar states Aw Abadir arrived in Harar in the year 1216 AD/405 H. However, 405 H does not coincide with 1216 AD. The year 405 H is 1001 in the Gregorian calendar. For this reason, some researchers cite 1001 AD/405 as the year of Aw Abadir's arrival and the founding of Harar. Historically inaccurate and impossible events. The Fath Madinat Harar describes Aw Abadir as fighting against the Italians, Turks, and Portuguese. This is impossible because people from those regions were not recorded as being in the area around Harar in the 13th century. However, Harari people did fight against the Portuguese in the 16th century. In the 16th century, during the Ethiopian Adal War, the Adal Sultanate battled against the Portuguese soldiers. This war took place 300 years after the dates of this document. In the end, with the help of the Portuguese, the Adal Sultanate lost against the Ethiopian Empire. The presence of the Argoba tribe in the Legend of Aw Abadir is also problematic. It is believed the Argoba migrated to their present settlements near Harar hundreds of years after the 13th century. Another issue is the inclusion of the presence of trains or tanks. This is not consistent with 13th century technology. Because of this, the document must have been written in the 19th or 20th century when these technologies became available. Cause of conflict and resolution technique. This narrative of Aw Abadir, an Arab, arriving in Harar to solve the problems of the African people is highly paternalistic. The foreign Arab is positioned as the more capable and desired leader over the native African one. The legend is a tale about a wise Arab who traveled to rescue the Africans from themselves. Another issue is that the root cause of the quarreling between the tribes is never specified in the oral traditions. What were the tribes fighting about that was so uncompromising that the leader had to recruit help from the Middle East? Were they fighting about ethnic differences? Religious differences? Land issues? The way in which Aw Abadir is said to have resolved the problem is also questionable. If this leader was truly a great one, he would have worked with the people and helped them build their own capacity to help themselves. Instead, to bring peace, he fought them with a sword or a wooden club. If two countries are at war, and a military leader from a different country joins and starts striking people with a weapon, is that adding to the fighting or helping to bring peace? In the modern world, when an unbiased third party is brought to warring nations to bring peace, they don't start attacking people. Instead, they engage in peaceful negotiations through dialogue. This is what true mediation looks like. Aw Abadir's method is not an effective conflict resolution technique. It is simply violence and cannot bring peace and diplomacy. Forcing those who don't agree into submission is not bringing peace, it's called subordination. If the leader of a nation engages in this tactic, it doesn't result in a peaceful society. It results in a society ruled by fear and passivity. The message the leader is sending is that he has the absolute truth and any disagreements must be resolved through force and violence. He acted as an authoritarian leader and left no room for compromise by considering the differences of opinion of the local people. In addition, the assertion that a foreign man arrived in a nation he had never been to before and was able to understand their concerns, fight them as a means of successfully resolving their concerns, and be unanimously appointed as the new leader is highly suspect. The real Sheikh Abadir Umar ar-Rida. Ethnic origin and time period. The Harari people are not the only group to hold Abadir in high regard. The Somali Sheikh clan also believe they are the descendants of Aw Abadir. This coincides with the oral tradition that states Aw Abadir traveled to Somalia. In the 16th century, the Adal Sultanate included Harar and Somalia. While the legendary account of him includes inaccuracies, these are likely later embellishments of the life of a real person. According to the legend, Aw Abadir entered Harar in the 13th or 11th century. However, aside from this legendary account, there is no evidence that supports this claim. If Aw Abadir truly did arrive during one of these time periods, there would be archaeological evidence or historical documents that support this event. For example, the reorganization of Harar during this time would have left archaeological evidence. However, this is not reflected in archaeological excavations. According to the latest research, the founding of Harar dates to the 16th century. The hypothesis that Aw Abadir lived during the 16th century is further supported by the legend of Saint Abadir of the Oromo Ichu people. The legend reports their founding father lived during the time of Aw Abadir and that the Ichu reached their settlement area in the 16th century. This saint is associated with tribal law, which also supports his existence to the 16th century. There is also a Harari tradition that credits Aw Abadir with managing a hunger crisis. After the Oromo invasion, Harar suffered from a famine that lasted 3 years in the 16th century while under the rule of Emir Nur ibn Mujahid. Umar ar-Rida was also likely a local Muslim of the Adal Sultanate, not an Arab immigrant. Therefore, if Aw Abadir did exist, it is certain that he existed during the 16th century and not the 13th nor 11th centuries. The attribution of a fabricated, older, Islamic history to a non-Islamic one is not an unprecedented event by Muslims. The legend of the 9th century Meccan Makhzumi dynasty in Ethiopia attempts to create a long Islamic history in a region where there wasn't one. In reality, it wasn't until the 12th century, 300 years after the legend claims, when the Muslims started gaining political power in the area around Harar. The desire for an older Islamic history is even apparent in the Quran itself. In the Islamic holy book, it states that the first Muslim was Adam, the biblical first man, created by God. This Islamization of the entire period of human existence is of course incorrect, since Islam is a religion that was started in the 7th century, at the earliest, by Arabs. This incorrect belief is also reflected in the way some Muslims call converts to the religion, reverts. This false idea is also echoed in the Hadith, where it is claimed that every person is born as a Muslim and their innate nature is to worship Allah. Thus, it is not surprising that the legend of Aw Abadir is an attempt at Islamizing a pagan past of 300 or 500 years. Political background of the 16th century, jihad, holy war, and the forgotten apostasy wars? In the years before the jihad between the Ethiopian Muslims and Christians, there was a religious shift happening. In the early 16th century, Harar was ruled by Bändär Abadir, who forbade all that was Islamically unlawful like drinking, dancing, and gambling. In 1520, Abu Bakr took control of Harar from Abadir and allowed these un-Islamic activities which the people reportedly engaged in. Abu Bakr moved the capital of the Adal Sultanate to Harar from Dakar, along with the people. The exact modern location of Dakar is not agreed upon in academia. However, because of the lax Islamic ruling in Dakar, it may have been located in the Harla or Ganda-Harla regions. This is because both regions were discovered to have large populations of suids, wild boar, and bush pig. It was suggested that this may indicate Islamic dietary laws were not strictly observed. There are some oral legends that say Aw Abadir originally lived in Dakar before moving to Harar. If this is true, perhaps his disagreement with the lax Islamic governance made him passionate about fighting for a more conservative one. The move undoubtedly led to a clash between the liberal and, potentially, non-Muslims from Dakar and more conservative Muslims of Harar. They were used to two completely different methods of governance, and now they were living together. In 1525, Abadir traveled to assassinate Abu Bakr. However, the conservative leader failed and was assassinated by Abu Bakr's troops instead. This outcome left the Ethiopian people divided, and some were allegedly desiring a more conservative Islamic society. A supporter of Bändär Abadir, Ahmad Gran, later led a 14-year jihad against the Ethiopian Christians between 1529 to 1543. The Muslims were engaged in war with the surrounding non-Muslims. The legend of Aw Abadir tells the tale of a man fighting those who didn't agree with him. Then, Abadir went to modern-day Somalia and also engaged in battles with those who didn't agree. He is credited with strengthening the religious institutional framework of the community by reorganizing the society. The description of Aw Abadir engaging in battle with those who did not submit, in order to bring peace, may be a euphemistic attempt at describing the jihad. Thus, Aw Abadir may have started his career in the Adal Sultanate as a military leader. Traditional accounts of this jihad is that it was against the Christians and pagan peoples in the area. However, the term jihad can also refer to a fight against Muslims. It is believed that there were many populations of Muslims around Harar that were only superficially Islamized during the jihad. During this time, some people were described as being deviant and stubborn. Thus it appears that the jihad was also against people who did not strictly adhere to Islam and even those who rejected it entirely. For example, the liberal Muslims who were followers of Abu Bakr could have been considered non-Muslim if they continued their behaviors that went against Islamic law. They would have been forced to adjust their behaviors or face the consequences in Harar. Their options would be to fight back, submit, or try to flee to live as they wished. It appears that there was resistance in the Harari region because according to the Legend of Aw Abadir, there were those who did not want to follow his instructions. Aw Abadir fought them with a sword or wooden club in an effort to force them to obey. This resistance is thought to have come from tribal differences. However, given the differences in religiosity in the region, it is not unimaginable that there were disagreements about Islamic expectations and rules as well. Aw Abadir's title as ar-Rida may lend support to the suggestion that the war was also against apostasy. The title Ar or al-Rida is also bestowed to other Islamic leaders due to their religious efforts. In Shia Islam, Imam Ali al-Rida is thought to have this title because he was accepted by both his friends and enemies. In the 19th century, Muhammad Rashid Rida was an Islamic scholar who wanted to unite Muslims. The enforcement of Islam. After the jihad, al-Nur led Harar at around 1550. Like a boy, al-Nur lived strictly according to the Sharia. He wanted the people of the new city to live according to strict interpretations of the Sharia law like he did. This would explain why the city has a high concentration of mosques, which started being built during the foundation of the city in the 16th century. In a true Islamic state under the Shafi school of thought, which al-Nur had established, a Muslim who did not pray must be executed because they would be considered an apostate. The punishment for apostasy in Islam is death. Sahih Muslim 1676.a. It is not permissible to take the life of a Muslim who bears testimony to the fact that there is no God but Allah, and I am the messenger of Allah, but in one of the three cases, the married adulterer, a life for life, and the deserter of his deen, Islam, abandoning the community. The ubiquity of mosques in Harar thus acted as both places of Islamic indoctrination and of social and political control. For example, if one was absent at the mosque, they may be suspected as abandoning their faith and thus deserved to be killed. Through the establishment of Islamic settings and social customs, the religious adherence of the Harari people was closely monitored and enforced. For example, at every mosque in Harar there is a prayer group that men could join. In these groups, the men are expected to go to the mosque and pray 5 times a day together. If someone is absent, his fellow group members would look for him. Similarly, if Harari children were absent from Quran Islamic classes, they would be forcibly brought back to the school, taunted and punished. Building these places of childhood indoctrination was a conscious endeavor. It is said that the idea to establish Quran was from a founding father and saint of Harar, al-Sofi Yahya. Just like mosques in Harar, Quran is also highly accessible as there is at least one located in every neighborhood. al-Nur's emphasis on increasing access to Islamic literature through building numerous mosques led to an increase in the adherence to Islam. Instrumental to teaching Islam was the Kitab al-Fara'id. This book is believed to have been written in the 17th century or possibly the late 16th century. The book functions as a basic guide to Islam. It is written in both Arabic and the local language at the time, Old Harari. It includes information about Islamic creed or Aqidah, beliefs and dogma. In contrast, in some areas of Ethiopia without access to Islamic scripture, religious flexibility exists whereby the people sometimes choose to convert from and to Islam for various reasons. The traditional reason why the wall was built around Harar was to protect the Muslims from violent non-Muslims. While this may be true, even more dangerous to an Islamic state are non-Muslim ideas that could influence the people and make them stray away from Islam. The people had strayed before under the rule of Abu Bakr, so Emir Nur did not want this to happen again. Therefore the wall was built as both a physical and an ideological barrier. Societal role as a high-ranking government general. Eliminate religious differences. Abadir was thus likely a key actor of Emir Nur's plan for a single, more conservative Islam to rule over the people. According to legend, Abadir is thought of as a reformer who introduced true Islam to the area. The Islamization of the people in the area was based primarily on years of interactions with Sufi sheikhs. In addition to the various levels of religiosity in Harar during this time, the multiple interpretations of Islam brought to the area over the years also left a diverse Muslim population. In the Muslim world, the word that refers to a reformer of Islam is a mujaddid. These individuals are said to appear every century as a major renewer of the faith. They would cleanse societies of un-Islamic practices, restoring Islam to its purest, truest form. As expected, a mujaddid is considered a highly revered Islamic figure, arguably the greatest Muslim of that century. Perhaps Aw Abadir's high position as a saint over all the others is because he was considered a mujaddid for teaching true Islam. In Islamic history, the goal of unity of the different Islamic interpretations was also pursued by the Abbasid Caliphate. Islam was practiced by different sects and mosques, so they tried to unite all Muslims under a single faith. Eliminate tribal differences through arbitration. According to legend, Abadir helped arbitrate disputes among tribes. There were different groups of Ethiopian Muslims around Harar up until the 16th century. The unification of Muslim groups in Harar occurred during Emir Nur's rule, between 1551 to 1556. It happened because when Emir Nur gathered the different Ethiopian Muslims from the area, fights broke out among them. He then arbitrated the disagreements. To prevent tribal disputes, he decided to destroy the genealogies of the people and ordered everyone to adopt a new unified identity. Today, this new identity is called Gayusu or Harari. Interestingly, the legend of Aw Abadir also starts with warring tribes. However, the legend places a figure named Emir Haboba as the one appealing for peace, not the 16th century Emir Nur. Protect the city from non-Muslims. It is believed that Aw Abadir lived during the very early stages of the foundation of Harar. Abadir is credited with building Harar's wall that prevented access to the city from non-Muslims. While Emir Nur gave the orders as the leader, Abadir was the face of the administration as he worked directly with the people. Religious instruction. In the Harari by Hair World video presented at the beginning of this article, the oral legend of Aw Abadir is discussed. Note that one of the speakers says that Aw Abadir tried to teach Islam in a way they would understand. This likely refers to the process of transforming previous religious beliefs into a form acceptable within Islam. The local people needed to be taught Islamic practices under the new conservative Islamic ruler because they were still participating in traditional, non-Islamic practices. Even if they were Muslim, they could have still held on to practices that were considered un-Islamic. Alternative hypothesis: Aw Abadir did not exist. Despite the evidence that suggests Umar ar-Rida lived in the 16th century, it is also possible that Aw Abadir never existed. As explained by this article, there are many inconsistencies in the original document, Fath Madinat Harar. This makes the document an unreliable source. The following are 3 suggestions as to why such a story would be made up. To explain the origin of the Harari people. The formation of the Harari ethnic identity was the result of the subduing of internal conflicts related to tribal and possibly religious disagreements. The collective group was then forced to take on a singular identity as a result. Judging from the facts, the Harari people were not formed on the basis of choice. They were formed on the basis of circumstance. There may have been people who did not want to be a part of Harar and live under strict Sharia law. For example, some may have felt pressured to stay due to economic or social reasons. The turbulent manner in which Harar was formed is not a tale worthy of national pride. Thus, the original facts could have been embellished with a heroic, central figure, Aw Abadir, Umar ar-Rida, to make a story worthy of being told. To connect Harari people to Prophet Muhammad. Aw Abadir is believed to have Arab roots and is related to the Prophet Muhammad. Because the Harari people claim to be descended from Aw Abadir, they are connecting themselves to the lineage of the Prophet. To be able to claim descent from the Prophet is a major source of pride across the Islamic world. The pride is reflected in Harari cultural songs that celebrate their believed descent from him. However, this claim is not verifiable and is one example of many from Muslims in the Horn of Africa who trace their genealogies to popular Islamic figures or to Prophet Muhammad. These claims of exalted origins are rarely verified and highly unlikely to be true. To have a local hero. The story of Umar ar-Rida paints him as an instrumental element to the foundation of Harar. He helped build the wall that protects the city, he fought against non-Muslims, promoted religious instruction and helped unify tribes into one social group. His accomplishments make him well suited to be someone the Harari people can look up to and admire, a role model. Maybe after a war or other calamity, the people of Harar needed someone to look towards for hope. For example, in 1567 the young city of Harar was devastated by a plague. Again, in 1887, the Battle of Chalenko was another tragic event. The story of Umar ar-Rida could have been the hero the people needed. Origin of Umar ar-Rida's title as Abadir. Coptic Christianity was introduced to the Kingdom of Aksum in the 4th century. In 1529 Emir Ahmed Gran propagated a jihad and converted a massive number of Ethiopian Christians to Islam. The former Christians likely held the Christian Saint Abadir as a highly revered figure because the Ethiopian Christian Church venerates Abadir as a saint and martyr. There are even Ethiopian records that discuss Abadir as a Christian saint. This interesting connection between the Coptic Christian Church's Saint Abadir, or Apatur, and Harar's Aw Abadir was also pointed out by Italian scholar Enrico Cerulli in 1971. Once the Christians were forcibly converted to Islam, it is possible they retained their reverence of Saint Abadir, but changed him to a Muslim saint from a Christian one. Saint Abadir is revered by both the Muslims and Christians in Harar. Additionally, he is also revered in other Ethiopian communities like those of Mount Sequala. During the festival of Abo at Mount Sequala, which is dedicated to the Christian Saint Gevre Memphis Kiddus, the people sing songs with frequent mentions of Allah, Abadir, other Islamic saints, and even the pre-Islamic sky god Wak. The widespread reverence of Aw Abadir in Ethiopia may indicate its origin even predates Christianity. Perhaps the word Abadir was a part of the ancient belief systems in Ethiopia. Maybe it refers to a high-ranking god in the same way the Phoenicians used the term. This is supported by the fact that at one point Ethiopia and South Arabia worshipped the same gods, which are also related to the gods worshipped by the ancient Canaanites, which includes the Phoenicians. For example, the Canaanite god Baal was worshipped in pre-Islamic Arabia and is even mentioned in the Quran. Furthermore, the Harari people today view Aw Abadir as a father figure. As mentioned at the beginning of this article, the way in which he is referred to can be literally translated as, Father, Mighty Father. In southern Arabia, the kingdoms had national deities whom the citizens would claim descent from. This is similar to how the Harari people claim descent from Aw Abadir. He is considered as the holiest and most revered saint of the city. The difference is that the southern Arabians believed they were the descendants of gods, while the Harari people today believe they are descendants of a divine human. However, it is possible that in the past Abadir did represent a pagan deity which later transformed into an Islamic saint during the process of syncretism. The attribution of Abadir to Umar ar-Rida is likely due to his leading position in Islamizing the new city's population. This is supported by his name, which has been recorded as Umar Abadir. This naming convention is consistent with a common East African Muslim practice of Islamizing one's name with the name of a traditional hero. The Dur clan of the Somali lived with and around the modern Harari people for centuries, including during the reign of the Adal Sultanate in the 16th century. If not Coptic Christian or Phoenician in origin, perhaps Abadir may be derived from the legend of the Somali Dur clan Islamizing East Africa, i.e. a combination of Abba, meaning father, and Dur. Therefore, it is very likely that the word Abadir was already associated with greatness from prior Christian, pagan, and/or Somali history and became attributed to Umar because of the scale of influence he had. In fact, the Christian story of Saint Abadir describes him as a high-ranking government official, sealer, which parallels Umar's high-ranking position within the Adal Sultanate. Conclusion. There is still much to learn about the authenticity of Harar's founding father. The name Abadir has ancient roots as a religious entity in pagan religions and Christianity. Umar ar-Rida's title as Abadir may point to remnants from the Harari people's Christian and/or pagan past. Interestingly, the meaning of the name as a father is maintained across time, religion, and culture. The legend of Aw Abadir, through both written and oral transmission, has many issues. Aw Abadir did not live in the 11th or 13th centuries as the legend recounts. Judging from the events described and other historical clues, it appears that if Aw Abadir did exist, he lived in the 16th century as a local high-ranking government administrator. He followed Amir Nur's orders, which included fighting against non-Muslims, working to create a unified Harar with one cultural and religious identity, and building a wall around the new city. The fictional elements of the legend could have been added on to the original reports of his life as embellishments, as is a common practice in the stories of Islamic saints. An alternative hypothesis is that Aw Abadir never existed. The legend could have been made up centuries later to explain the origin of the city, connect it to Prophet Muhammad, and/or to have a story of a local hero. Regardless of whether Aw Abadir existed as a real person in Harar's history or not, hundreds of years later, his name lives on.